All right, my third one of the day. Women, as far as AP US history, and you can see the length of this time period from 1491 all the way to the 2010s. As soon as you see the year 1491, you should realize that you're dealing with American Indians. They definitely had a more communal life. If there's a weakness that I must admit, my weakness is early American history, early American Indian history. Definitely there are different roles depending on the different nations and where you are located. The Aztecs are definitely more of a paternal society, and there were some matriarchal societies throughout different areas. I could not name them, but for the most part, women in American Indian culture, there definitely will be more of the gatherers. They're really not in the hunting parties, but they definitely are they really run the communities, and so they play much more of a role than they do in the Europeans that are going to be venturing here. 1500s, as far as women are concerned, you get the, I always like to bring up La Malinche, I believe is the correct way to say it. I might be butchering it, but this is the Aztec woman that actually sides, or kind of, they say that she was the lover of Cortez when he came to the Aztecs and actually helped him persuade Montezuma to almost allow the conquistadors to come in, and then of course disease and everything else comes, and so her name pretty much becomes known as traitor. But La Lomenche or La Lomenche in the 1500s in the fall of the Aztec Empire. The other now. Again, if I'm skipping some women, I do apologize if you're listening to this and you're yelling at me, hey, you're skipping some. I'm not going to try to skip too many, but in the late 1500s, I always like to bring up Virginia Dare, which is actually the first British-born citizen in the colonies. She's born in Roanoke. And so she's actually going to, she kind of makes her little mark in history, but of course we don't know what happened to Virginia Dare. 1607 to 1763, you're talking about colonization. Where are women moving to? Well, predominantly, if you can picture the U.S. map, you're talking about women are moving to the New England colonies. Well, why? Because that's where the Puritans and Pilgrims are bringing them. Jamestown is going to be founded primarily by the fellas. So I always talk about the fellows are moving down to Jamestown, and families are moving up to the New England colonies. The longevity is not even close. The longevity in the New England colonies is to the 70s. A lot of people are living into their 70s. It's amazing what women do to guys. They actually make us go and do the correct things, and not be idiots and go look for gold, God, and glory, and all the other stuff that we were doing down in Jamestown and starving and dying. So men are much more, they are adventurous, but they're much more family oriented, and they will stay and protect the family much more than they do in Jamestown. Women, as you progress through the colonies, they will have different roles. From 1607 to 1763, you'll start to see more of a spread of devotion, because of course you start to get into the First Great Awakening, and you start to see the changing role where it's more, I want to say, a European influence on women. When you have the ability not to have to go and hunt and gather, and the farther west you move, if there's a commonality between 1607, as I'm looking at my dates here, 1607 and the Civil War, 1861. There's a similarity between 1607 and the Civil War. The farther west you moved, the more independent you were. As a woman, you had the ability, you pretty much ran the house, or at least helped run the house. The farther you were on the East Coast, the more domesticated you were. It was a more patriarchal society versus matriarchal society. And so if you were between 1607 and 1763, you're going to start to see a shift where more, it's going to turn into a more patriarchal society. Some of the women that you might want to know, in between 1607 and 1763, of course, is Anne Hutchinson. That's going to help to found Connecticut and Rhode Island, kicked out of the Massachusetts Bay Colony for anti-Mormonism, pretty much saying that I'm going to be able to preached to God myself. I don't need intercessories, and the preachers were really did not have the ultimate word to God. So she's going to be banished. She actually, if I remember right, she had like 15 kids, but she's actually killed by American Indians. You also see the Salem witch trials. Teenage girls, 1692 is going to help drive the scare of the Salem witch trials. And if you mention the Salem witch trials, you can also mention the two Red Scares that take place. No relation to women, okay, the communists, but they are scares that take place. 1763. I forgot to cross all these dates out. 1763 to 1776. You start to see the rise of the daughters of the American Revolution, the revolutionary time period, women actually helping bring about revolutionary times. You have Betsy Ross, of course, sewing the first flag, but women will play a great role as far as fighting in the American Revolution. You have, and I always like to bring in the next time period, 1776. I bring up Abigail Adams. Abigail Adams, who writes to her husband or speaks to her husband, hey, remember the ladies when you create the Declaration of Independence, when they say all men are created equal, hey, why not include women in there? But of course they don't. He doesn't listen to her. But probably one of the most educated women of the time, Abigail Adams. You have Molly Pitcher. I wish I could remember Molly Pitcher's actual first name. Actual last name, but Molly Pitcher is going to actually help in the Battle of Monmouth, which is an American battle during the Revolutionary War. During this time period, 1776 to 1800, you're going to see the growth of Republican motherhood. Republican motherhood is that ideal that women are actually going to teach the ideals of the American Revolution to our young. And so they're actually seen as the people, the instruments, that are going to cause us to pursue the ideals of the American dream, and they're going to hold that and teach that to the kids. 1800 to 1840s, you're going to see a shift, especially on the East Coast, of cult of domesticity. The cult of domesticity is women should be more at home and stuff like that. But there is also a growth of the Second Great Awakening. In the Second Great Awakening, you see three major movements. You're going to see the temperance movement, the abolitionist movement, and suffrage movement. And so you see all three of those. Women are involved in all three of those movements, spurring out of the Second Great Awakening. So these are going to be great awakenings and great movements for women to play a part in from 1800 to 1840. 1830s, I always bring up the Lowell system that took place in Massachusetts. For the most part, women, either they worked in textile mills, which is the Lowell system in Massachusetts, or they were teachers. That's pretty much the occupations that they had in the early 1800s. But there's going to be a shift when you get to 1848. In 1848, of course, in Seneca Falls, New York, you have the Seneca Falls Convention. And this is going to be the first major women's rights convention. Ding, 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 as far as women are concerned, you need to know Seneca Falls Convention. First major women's rights convention that's going to talk about women's suffrage. And Susan B. Anthony, Elizabeth Cady Stanton, you're going to have these that are involved. Lucretia Mott, they're going to be involved in the women's rights. And even Frederick Douglass is there. That is going to push for women's rights. Of course, they will not achieve that until 1920. 1840s to the 1865, you're going to have more independent women are going to be created because it's manifest destiny and more women are moving out west. They're going to have to be more independent. You have women that served during the Civil War as nurses. There is one woman that dresses up as a man, passes herself off as a man. I can't remember her name, but there is actually a woman soldier that serves during the Civil War and portrays herself as a man, and so she serves as a soldier during the Civil War. But Claire Barton and what's the other? I'm drawing a blank. Again, I'm winging this. But there's another primarily they served as nurses during the Civil War. From 1865 to 1900, you're going to see the growth of women in industry Now, they're not major parts of industry, but secretarial work. There are some women that actually work in the workforce. You also see the growth of settlement houses. Jane Hull and Lillian Wald. Jane Hull is going to create Hull House in Chicago, and in doing so, she's going to help women, teach women how to be better citizens and how to be better women and to become more employable in the marketplace, along with Lillian Wald in New York. You also see the growth of the muckraking journalist during this time period. That kind of spills over into the 1900s with the Ida Tarbell and Ida Wells and women such as that. From 1900 to the 1920s, again, I go the muckraking journalist, and I have to mention how women are going to be part of the progressive movement. Jane Addams and Lillian Wald, Ida Tarbell, all those muckraking journalists, all part of the progressive movement that are going to help. Harriet Tubman, actually, because I didn't mention her in the Underground Railroad, but her major contribution, of course, is going to be after 1850, right during this time period here. But Harriet Tubman is going to live until 1913, just 7 years short of actually getting the right to vote. But women will actually get the right to vote in 1920, and the first candidate that they're actually able to vote for is Warren G. Harding, who becomes president. You also see in the 1920s, of course, the Roaring Twenties, and you start to see the flappers that come out, and in doing so, women start to challenge the norms of society. And in doing so, you'll see shorter hair, more makeup, shorter dresses, just challenging what the norms were. The 1920s was supposed to be the return to normalcy. Well, it's going to be the opposite of that. One other thing I did forget, let me go back to this time period right here, 1865 to 1900, first state that actually gave women the right to vote. What is it? Yep, those of you shouting at your screen, your computer screen right now, that is Wyoming. That actually was the first state, 1869. 1930s. The unique thing about the 1930s is you're going to see women during the Great Depression actually get the ability to work more than men. And there's sort of a shift in the culture a little bit in the 1930s, where women are actually working more than men are. That will change when we get to the 1940s with the introduction of World War II. Now, men are out fighting, but what happens to women? They actually are going to put everything together. You get the growth of Rosa the Riveter, probably the most iconic figure that comes out of World War II, and women will be able to show that they actually can put together planes, tanks, guns, ammunition, and anything that we need to actually carry out World War II. But when World War II ends, a lot of the women are pushed out of the workforce in 1945. Men are returning home, and you have what becomes known as the baby boom. From 1945 to, some say 1962, it's kind of the baby boom. It's a long period for the baby boom, but it is the baby boom generation, the largest growth rate of births from 1945 to 1962. 1950s, I always say it's the return to normalcy. We're trying to return to normalcy, but we're also trying to conform. It's one of the C's that I talk about in the 1950s with women, where women are going back to almost a cult of domesticity, where they want to be a mom. You have TV shows like Father Knows Best and Leave It to Beaver that pretty much shows a male, patriarchal society, and in doing so is going to try to develop that with such shows as like I Love Lucy and stuff. That are going to be created during the 1950s. But it's kind of almost like an age that a lot of us harken back to the 1950s, the good old days. It was good for some, but not good for all, as far as women are concerned. 1960s, of course, we're going to get the cultural shift. If there's a synthesis that you can get, 1760s, 1860s, and 1960s. 1760s protest, 1860s Civil War, 1960s protest again. 1960s, you'll get the feminist Betty Friedan is going to pretty much dismiss being moms as that being important. You need to be the working woman, and it's going to challenge women? Can you actually do both? Can you actually be a successful mom, raise your kids, and at the same time be that successful mother? And so it's going to be a challenge for women from the 1960s forward. 1970s. If I go back to the 1950s, just really quick, I addressed the glass ceiling here, where women in the 1950s really could not get promoted. They were still teachers, they were still secretaries, they were subordinate as far as the workforce. Now, you did have women during this time period that actually did own businesses and stuff like that, but 1970s, you're going to see the largest growth of these women that are starting to own businesses and see the growth of women and break through the glass ceiling, such as women like Sandra Day O'Connor. I believe it's 1982. She's appointed by Ronald Reagan as the first female on the Supreme Court, of course, from the great state of Arizona, Sandra Day O'Connor. But you also see the breaking of the glass ceiling, and even we might see it this coming election year in 2016. You have the Democrats have Hillary Clinton, and the Republicans have Carly Fiorina that is running, and so you could possibly see two women actually vying for the top spots in both the Republican and the Democratic nominations. So again, from 1491 all the way to 2010s, there's definitely been a large growth as far as women. One thing I did forget, 1970s, ladies that are involved in athletics, Title IX. For every sport that you have in athletics for males at the college level, you must have something that's equal or opposite, or something that's going to counterbalance sports, and that's going to introduce more female sports into the college athletics, which gives women a huge advantage. I always like to root for the guys. No offense, women, but I like to root for the guys because right now, by the 2015s, I think we're at 60-40, maybe even 65-35, where there's 65% of the people that are going to college are women, 35% are men. That's not a healthy statistic, at least according to the philosophy of yacht. Fellas, you need to step up and start getting educated and start driving yourself and getting your hind parts into college or technical institutes. That's it. Look, a little over 17 minutes, and I'm done through women. Only one more to go.